also on December 5th, Alicia Barton from NYSERDA. She's the head of NYSERDA. That'll be at 4:30 in the afternoon. There's information on our website about both those speakers, if you're interested. So the person who's supposed to introduce Andreas is not able to make it today. His kid was sick, so I'll be introducing him today. He's a co-founder and managing director of the Nextel Holding. It's a company dedicated to structuring promotion and investment in business opportunities in the renewable sector, and it has a large impact on reducing climate change. Prior to Nextel, Andreas founded and ran Sonodix.
It's okay. Close enough.
Global Holding as its CEO. He took it from startup to a $4 billion company in just over 9 years, so that's extremely impressive. He has over 8 years in the renewable power industry. I worked at such companies as AES SolarSpan, Abertech USA, and Sith Energies, which is an independent power producer in New York, Beijing, Seoul, and Hong Kong. He's an alumni of Cornell, which is exciting to have him back here. He's from the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. He also holds an MBA from IESC Business School in Spain, and he's fluent in Spanish, French, English, and Norwegian, and conversation Italian. So I'm not sure which language he's given the presentation in today. It'll just be we have to guess as he goes along.
Won't be in Japanese. I spent 3 years there, but didn't pick up the language.
With that, I'll leave him to do his presentation.
Super. So I hear getting group participation is important. So who here has ever been asked a question before? Show of hands. All right, everyone's participating. We're doing well. Okay, good. So that was not going to be the be-all and end-all of your participation. That's just kind of making sure you're all awake, number one. So the title has 3 kind of main concepts in it. Engineering, that's you, okay, and me. Entrepreneurship, that's something that we're going to talk about today, the second half. And the renewable energy revolution. And the reason I have this giant storm here is because the storm is already upon us. Okay, so all the conditions exist for a massive energy transition, and it's already begun. And you guys are going to be graduating anytime soon, and you guys are entering into a time in history when trillions of dollars are going to be spent on this shift, moving from a conventional industry to a largely renewable industry. Now, these are quotes from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They're probably the predominant powerhouse that looks at what's happening in the renewable industry in Europe. There's a group called REN21. They talk about this stuff. They have lots of good stuff online. They do an annual report every year. Bloomberg also does an annual report. New Energy Finance or New Energy Outlook. NEO and NEF are the 2 big things they publish. So these are just a couple excerpts. They see 13.3 trillion invested in power generation and another 11.4 in distribution and transmission. They see this happening because bringing all these renewables online, most of these renewables don't produce the power when you want them to be produced. They produce them when they can produce them. That's going to provide challenges to the transmission grid, and moving into cheaper generation and cleaner generation is going to provide that. So 25 trillion spent over the next 30 years on a sector is an enormous quantity of money. Job security in this sector is going to be enormous, okay? Problems are going to arise much quicker, and that's what we're going to talk about here. How fast is this happening? So the main point is different people take different views as to what's going to happen. This is Navigant Energy. They're kind of looking at this like, oh, it's going to be an energy cloud. We're going to have our car selling power back to the grid and acting as our backup battery at night when the sun comes up, when the sun goes down. They're looking at, you can see large billions of dollars being spent on the energy cloud. If you can just look at all the different things, and this will be in the presentation that I'll share after, if you look at all the different nodes that they're looking at, there's ample opportunity. Any one of these subsectors is going to get billions and billions and billions of dollars of problems and solutions that need to be solved, okay? And by billions and billions, I don't mean the problems billions, but billions of dollars spent on solving these problems. So as engineers, we're actually very well positioned to help solve these problems, because there's one thing we do better than most people. We understand trends, and we can understand the numbers. Hopefully, if you're studying here, that's why you're here, right? Because you're actually really, really good at a few things. And we're going to talk about that, what you're good at, later. So how is a renewable energy kind of revolution affecting the grid. So one of the best ways to look at that is to let history tell us. So I take this to Germany. So I take an average March month in Germany, and this is a really messy graph, and it's messy on purpose, okay? What it's showing you is down here, you got your little blue line here, which is basically, I think it's hydropower at the bottom, right? This is a month. Throughout the month, water was flowing through this, out of this dam and producing power. This is the entire grid, by the way. Then you had the nuclear piece, if I'm not mistaken. No, sorry, biomass, then nuclear, red. Then you had some brown coal, some hard coal, and then you had some oil, and you had some pump storage that was moving in and out of storage. But looking at it at this scale is kind of useless. And then you can kind of see what happened with renewables. Well, you had wind in here. It was very windy beginning of the month, and then the wind tapered off for about a week, and then wind started up again, and wind went down. But on top of it, you had kind of these little solar spikes, right? Sun came up, sun came down all throughout the month, but it's hard to see at this scale. So I'm going to give you the next month, okay? This is same month, but much sunnier, right? Now you're just 1 month forward, and you're seeing tons more sun happening, right? Not as much wind, and you're seeing there's some problems with the coal plant. They're shutting down a coal plant over here, or two. Right? They're shutting down a bunch of coal here because they're just getting overwhelmed with all this sunshine, and they're anticipating wind based on the meteorological forecasting. So they're saying, let's shut down some coal, and then let's bring that coal back online, right? So they're trying to deal with an unstable grid. When you have instability, you have problems. When you have problems, you need solutions. Who are the people that provide solutions? Typically engineers, okay? Now, this last week here, if we look at the last week, now here's a week. Power goes up, power goes down. As the sun comes up, the sun goes down. Now, all this data is publicly available, right? You Google power in Germany at any point in time. The whole point about the first half of the lecture is, let's look at the data, because there's tons and tons of data out there. And by looking at the data, you can predict the future. When you can predict the future, you can position yourself for success, okay? So by looking at the data, you can kind of see the sun shines, okay? And if you look at this particular day, you know, not the biggest day, not the smallest day of sun, you've got some wind, you got some sun, and right at this moment, at 6:45 a.m. in Miami, because I happened to be in Miami when I was doing this, so at about noon 45 in Germany, okay, solar was producing 17, because my clock on my computer wasn't smart enough to correct for Germany versus Miami. 17 gigawatts of solar, 12 gigawatts of wind. So roughly 30 gigawatts out of 60 gigawatts production, okay, was coming out of renewables in Germany at this point in time. And if you add power, if you add hydro, there was a little bit more, some biomass, right? You're talking about 40% of the grid was being fed by anything other than coal and nukes and stuff like that. Although, again, nukes don't bother me quite as much as coal, because at least they're carbon-free kind of electricity production. But if you look at that, you need to get curious. If you're on this website, if you made it this far, you got a bunch of radio buttons over here. Like, I could look at what's just run a river, what's just nuclear, what's just lignite. Lignite being soft coal. What's oil, what's gas, right? But there's some radio buttons here. I have no idea what these do other than if I want to see solar and wind alone or import and export, that could be interesting, right? If I look at conventional, over 100, I can take all this noise out and look at a slightly simpler version of this, but whoop, all of a sudden I get some additional information I didn't have on the previous version. The previous version is the one that Fraunhofer Institute spits you out, and I put the links down here for you if you're just curious, if you ever want to go look there in the future. But as soon as you click that radio button from here to here, okay, which it doesn't do automatically for you, what you see is what's happening on a daily basis. Power is being pushed out of Germany and is being sucked into Germany on a daily basis. So if you were studying batteries, there's a business opportunity here, right? Roughly, 3 gigawatt peak, right? And these days, and some more over here, right? And you can look at this on a monthly basis, daily basis, annual basis, all the data's there, right? And this is now, right? So this was April, but you can also go today. You can look at it real time. And you can see that that's the same 16 gigawatts and 12 gigawatts, but actually when you look at it, the peak moved from 60, which was their production, to 45, because actually Germany only used about 45 gigawatts of power, but they had 60 available. What happened to the other, power? It got pushed out, right? So if you look at it on a daily basis, what you're seeing is this power generation here, which is about the response time of coal, it's not responsive, right, is being pushed by wind and by solar, right? It's being pushed out into its neighbors, exports, right? And it doesn't really matter what size that is, okay? I'm not really concerned about, I'm just looking at trends, because the biggest thing for me as an engineer, as I'm trying to position myself for where my business needs to be, I don't care how big this spike is, I care about the trend. If this has happened in Germany where solar and wind penetration is high, it's going to happen everywhere else. Why is it going to happen everywhere else? We're going to talk about that. So Germany, right, is currently exporting that power, the excess solar power, into its neighbors, right? All of its neighbors. France has a huge solar ambition, just passed new laws to put another 30 gigawatts of solar into France, right? So France is going to be pushing back. Benelux, Holland, and Belgium, they're both, and Luxembourg, they're all pushing back, right? Switzerland has a small solar program. I don't see them pushing back anytime soon. Austria, similar to Switzerland. Czech Republic has a solar program, right? Poland just started a solar program a few years ago. Denmark's turning super green, right? They're adding solar. So what's happening over time is that all these neighbors are going to have the same problem Germany has in the middle of the day. What's going to happen with all that power, right? When there's too much power on the grid, what happens to it? New solutions are born, right? So is it a hydrogen economy, right? All that cheap power in the middle of the day that has no price, right? If nobody needs it, the price goes to zero. The laws of supply and demand. If demand is zero, price is zero. What happens? Well, somebody's going to buy that power, split water, store hydrogen. Germany is passing laws right now. Sweden's passing laws right now, trying to create a hydrogen economy. Because the only players that are big in hydrogen today, BP, Shell, right? The guys that we don't want splitting those hydrogens apart from their hydrocarbons. We don't want that hydrogen. We want clean hydrogen, right? Because that other industry is on its way out, right? The age of oil will come to an end, much like the Stone Age came to an end long before the resource runs out, okay? So, question is it a smarter grid? Is it utility scale battery banks? I don't think the batteries will get there soon enough. I think there might be an interim hydrogen economy. I think the Germans might be right on this one, okay, and the Swedes. So what's going to happen is nobody knows how to do this stuff yet. Everyone's trying to figure it out. So you guys are graduating. You guys have the most up-to-date knowledge, right? I graduated 25 years ago. All I'm doing is basic math and regression analysis on this stuff. You guys actually know what you're doing. So you guys are light years ahead of me. If you know where the future is going, all you have to do, you look to the past, you figure out where you were, and you can figure out where you're going. If you know where you're going, you can position yourself for what everybody else is just freaking out about. People are freaking out about these solutions. They don't have answers. You know what? What I've found, the coolest head always wins. If you can actually see where this is headed, you can position yourself, and people will respect the fact that you have a plan, and people will follow you. And that's the biggest challenge as an engineer, is actually to create followership. And that's what the second half of the presentation is going to be about. So essentially, total generation, summertime, wintertime, right? Low carbon generation, that's what it looks like, right? This doesn't have to be Germany, this is anywhere in the world. And this is the market opportunity. What do we do with this, right, today? And what do we do when that is starting to come in from all sides? Right? There's lots of solutions just waiting to be born. That's the future, right? That's not even the future, that's already happening. That's on us, okay? So question is, why is it happening? And why is it happening so fast? Why is this problem, happening? So you look at the levelized cost of energy of renewables is becoming very competitive. So today I can build a solar plant and produce power at 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and I can make a double-digit return. I can make way more than I can do by putting my money in stocks or bonds, or the stock market on average for the last 100 years has made about 7%. I can make 12% putting solar in a field right now, right, at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So 3 cents a kilowatt hour is, as the guys at Bloomberg New Energy Finance or New Energy Outlook, right, says that that wind and solar now represent at least the least expensive option for adding new power generation capacity in the world. In two-thirds of the world, in approximately two-thirds of the world, wind and solar represent at least expensive option for adding power generation capacity. That's why it's happening so quickly, because it's the cheapest. And when it comes to economies and trying to be competitive, cheap is good, okay? Now, they also say, okay, to kind of pat themselves on the back, they say this is a result of a detailed study and an outlook for energy demand, country by country, with 65 analysts looking at this stuff, right? I don't have 65 analysts, right? I have myself and maybe one more person looking at this stuff. They have market-leading work. So why would anybody question what they say? So nobody does. The entire industry believes these people. And that's a great opportunity for all of us sitting here in the room. Because if you actually look at how these forecasts are generated, you're going to find some very surprising things. So what they're saying is, over here, right? Solar today, 2019, is about 2.4% of the world's energy supply. Difference between energy and power, guys. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Energy, 2.4%. Solar only shines during the day, and it only shines really brightly at noon. Okay? So that energy, as far as power, you have to multiply by about 5 to see the impact it has on the grid. So when people look at this, they say, well, it's not a big problem. It's not really going to be a big problem until about here, where it's about 10% or a little bit more, maybe 20. Then I'm going to have to worry about it. 20% of energy multiplied by 5, that's 100% of the grid being supplied by solar at that point in time. Right? Because it's 8,760 hours in a year, 1,500 hours on average of solar in the latitudes where we're seeing solar going in today, right? The big volumes coming in on a daily basis. So at 1,500 hours versus 8,760, you have a 5x impact. That little bar there doesn't show you what the real problem is, and that's what people are missing here. That's part of the image that they're missing. So when you read this, you say, they know what they're talking about. Why would I question them? So let's see how good they were. So they say, based on all those numbers that they've crunched with their 65 analysts, they've said, in China, for instance, a coal chase, so a country where where coal is cheap, they say coal power prices are going to be about here, okay? In the $40 a megawatt hour, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So in your home, you're paying anywhere from 10 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So their cost, the utility, if they're producing it with coal, it's about 4 cents a kilowatt hour, okay? And the rest is, distribution and margin. They're saying that solar, this blue curve, is going to cross over by 2027 in China. Okay? They say that onshore wind is crossing over by 2023. So at this point, what is happening? What does that mean, LCOE? This is the fully loaded cost of a brand new solar plant, fully financed, what it costs. If you divide that over the expected lifetime of the plant, divide by all the kilowatt hours it'll ever produce, including a reasonable return. Now, if you take that, what they're comparing it to is coal and gas data are marginal costs of generation. So the plant's already built, no investment. I just want to add 1 MMBTU of gas. I want to light it on fire, run it through my turbine, and if I have to do some maintenance and pay some people to do that, that's the cost they're loading. So brand new solar system versus just 1 more kilowatt hour from an existing facility. That's what they're comparing to. What happens once you fall below there is for every kilowatt hour that you're producing with gas, you're losing money as a utility. You could replace that with brand new solar at cheaper than it is for you to burn gas, right? That's why this crossover is super important, okay? You may have seen this in other lectures, I'm not sure. The vapor trail, what they're talking about here is the gas side of things. So in the US, this is the expected price of gas looking forward. So roughly 3 cents a kilowatt hour, right, over the near term, okay? There, Bloomberg New Energy Finance expecting solar to cross the line in 2030, okay? That's based on all those funny numbers that they had, when they talked about, they talked about all these great things that they put in their study to predict volume. They predicted volume based on these prices on a 2030 crossover. At 2030, solar will be competitive in the US, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. How did they get there? Well, this is a chart of historical prices of solar panels, which is just one component of what makes up a solar plant over time. I stopped it intentionally at 2014 because there's a point I want to make. First thing, what are you guys seeing here? Okay, the first thing you should notice, well, this is an old chart, okay? The other thing you should notice is that even though they say M23, you should ask yourself, what is M? Okay, M is the learning. So what they're saying is for each doubling, going from 1,000 to 2,000 on a logarithmic scale, how much should my price drop be? So based on this line, they're learning for every doubling of PV panels on the planet, right, there should be a 23% reduction in price. That's what learning is, okay? You can actually do a different math, which is you can just say, what's the average cost reduction per year, which is something that's easier to wrap your head around. That's 9.9% per year. Okay, so figure about 10% price reduction per year. The other thing that's interesting is they also put lithium-ion batteries on here, and they're saying, well, that's a similar trend. Very few data points, but so already you're thinking we got an export problem, import-export problem, and they're saying, well, this is something we should be tracking. Okay, so now let's look at their forecasts. Okay, and we'll get to an updated version of that other chart in a minute. In 2006, they forecast that this will be the growth, the annual deployments of solar panels every year, right? In 2007, they forecast that this will be the actual. In 2008, this was going to be the forecast, or 2010, this was going to be the forecast. In 2011, that was the forecast. 2012, they were having reductions, okay? But what happened in reality, it just went up, 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 up. If you see a forecast in the market, if you Google anything for your industry that you're working in, and you see a forecast that's this wrong every year, you know somebody's missing something, right? Somebody's missed something. So let's say, okay, so Bloomberg may be missing something. Let's look at somebody else. Let's look at PV additions from the International Energy Agency, right? So this is one of the, I think, World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency. You look at their forecasts, you know? You say, wow, these guys thought we'd peaked every year. They had reductions each year, right? So you'd say, wow, these guys are really crazy. So now let's superimpose this guy on that guy, okay? Now, what I did to superimpose it, I matched the scale on the left, and I matched the years on the right. So my curves are landing right on top of each other. And you can see, so the IEA is saying it's this way, and Bloomberg is saying it's this way. They're both wrong, by the way. This way, this way, this way, this way, right? But the biggest thing is, why are they so wrong? They've been doing this for 15 years, and they're getting it wrong every single year, and every year they think they're right, right? They're publishing this stuff. People are buying panels on this basis. It's insane. People are planning production on this basis. All you have to do is look at the data. It's all available. You just Google, seriously, PV prices, historical PV prices, PV price forecasts. You'll see 10 different reports, and they're all using the same data. And if you actually dig down, they're all using Bloomberg data, okay? And then they're taking a different view on the future. Now, let's look at Bloomberg data, okay? This is Bloomberg's actual data from their report. So this is their prices in each year. So they're saying, according to their graph, they had a 10% price reduction each year. I did a regression on this graph, okay, to see what is the actual, and is a polynomial regression to the third power to get a curve, more or less. But they're saying that solar panels, so let's go to solar panels, the blue, the module, right? They're saying a 23% reduction back in 2010 or so. But by 2018, 2019, which is where we're at right now, they're guessing like a 12% reduction per year. And by 2025, they're assuming a 8% reduction per year, or 6% reduction per year. Yeah, it's a pretty small compared to the 10 historical, right? So for 50 years straight, it's been 10% a year, but these guys are saying it should be about 5, right? Why? Why are they saying that? And you can do the same for inverters or balance of plant, EPC. You can look at each one of these. So now let's figure out how wrong they actually are. So 1976, now let's go all the way to 2018. So M has increased from 24 to 29. G has increased from 10% a year to 13% a year. Now what are your observations? Observations should be learning rate, 29% per doubling. The average person might even think the price drop, do the math, the price drop per year is 13%. Most people probably won't notice or won't ask themselves, how is this data used? And let's see if they're actually using it. And let's see what else. What happened here? Why are these colors different? Well, guess what? Chinese silicon modules. So what happened here in 2004? 2004, China looked at their 10-year plan, their 12-year plan. They have a 5-year plan and a 12-year plan. In their 12-year plan, they made it strategically important for China to have a significant position in the crystalline market. Okay, why? Because they know that whoever controls the world's energy controls the world. It's what the British did with their sail ships during the British Empire. And so they wanted to essentially take an interesting position in this market because they knew this was coming, right? Their target was to have 25% of the world's economy in 12 years. Today they're 90%. They were aiming for 25. Why? Because nobody gets in the way of somebody who knows where they're going. The Chinese knew where they were going. They did a phenomenal job at bringing costs down. So what's happened between here and here? You see a much steeper curve. You see that something's changed, and something's changed. What's changed is China. China was learning, and then China implemented, okay? And China did a phenomenal job at this, okay? Nobody's produced modules of the quality or the quantity like China has been able to do. So what you're seeing actually from 2008 to 2018, the learning's at 38%. 38. That's why that graph is off. And the... oh, that's a typo. The G is 13%. I updated that on my other computer, I guess. 13% per year, up from 10, right? So now, if you're Bloomberg New Energy Finance and you say, okay, so I know prices are going to go down at 13% a year because I don't see this trend. This is a logarithmic scale, right? So this is to double that again. You know, you got to go way out there. This trend is going to continue for a while, okay? What can you do? So now let's look at this, okay? So this is really hard to see from all the way back, so I'm going to give it to you a little bit closer. I'm going to try and give it to you closer. There we go. So 2018 to 2019, there's one thing Bloomberg cannot argue with, okay? That the modules went from 30 cents to 23 cents. People are getting quotes at 23 cents today versus 30 cents in 2018, and that is a 23% reduction. So they actually used it in their forecast. Wow. Excellent. Rather than 10% in their graph, they used a 23% reduction. Now, let's look at the year after. 23%. Now, 4, 5, 7, 6, 6, 5. Why? Why are they stacking the deck like this? It doesn't make any sense. They're being conservative. Why are they being conservative? Well, they'd rather underestimate than be responsible for telling a whole bunch of people to invest in this stuff because they were expecting volume that never appeared and be blamed for over-predicting. They'd rather under-predict. They're being conservative. Fine. But you can take a position as a business person, as an entrepreneur going into this industry. You could say, look, if it was 23% per year for that year, and it's going to be 13% on average, or maybe 10% on average, if you go to the 1976 average, I can take a bigger number than 4, right? I can maybe forecast this at 8 or at 10. That's what I've been doing. I've been winning bids for 8 years straight using the real forecast, not Bloomberg forecast, because the whole market's looking at this line. And the reality is that line is much steeper. So for me, what happens when you apply the real math, and I don't do the volume calculations because I don't have the 65 analysts working for me to figure out what the volume, what the consumer behavior is going to be depending on the price. So I can just use their volume, but use my prices. And if I use my prices, their 2030 crossover in the United States happens in 2022. I would say that's a significant shift. 2030 versus 2022. In 2022, it'll be cheaper to put in a brand new solar system just about anywhere in the United States than to fire an additional MMBTU of gas anywhere in a peaker. That's not some problem that's 10 years out. That's today. 2022 is today. If you know that today, you're starting to work on the solution today, because that's the problem every utility in the United States is going to be facing tomorrow. So for me, the interesting shift here is that whether you believe that this is the crossover, this is my internal calculation, or you believe Bloomberg New Energy's forecast with just adjusting, a couple of the parameters, and you say it's 2025, whether it's 2025 or 2022, it's near, okay? My calculations have it at 2022, and actually, if I'm a little bit more aggressive, because I'm pretty conservative, I only pushed modules down and inverters down to their historical average drops, and I have it at a decreasing rate of drop, just assuming that, we're going to get to commoditization eventually. Then I would say we're probably closer to 2021 when this crossover happens. And I use a marginal cost of 3 cents for oil and gas, even though coal is at 4. Coal is at 4. And gas is at, you can see here, a little under 3. I just use 3 as my proxy to figure out when my crossover is. So my crossover happens here. So I'm positioning myself for that moment in time. So when you read something like this, and these guys have these bold statements, you have to ask yourself, don't believe the hype. Just don't. You see this and you say, wait a second. If I know everything that I know today, Is it really going to take till 2050 for solar to be this much of world energy? I don't think so. I think those $25 trillion that we talked about being spent between now and 2050 are going to be spent between now and 2040, if not sooner. So anyone that's looking at providing solutions for these problems will have job security or entrepreneurship opportunities for a lifetime, right? You're talking about 20 to 25 years of professional life, and you're just in the middle of the perfect storm, and it's just about to begin. 2021, 2022, all hell breaks loose. Right? That's when every utility in the world says, I need to get rid of my conventional generation, I need to replace it all with solar, but if I do that, my grid falls apart. How do I solve that problem? Lots and lots of problems, lots and lots of solutions means lots and lots of opportunities. So it's a cool time to be alive in this world. Now, how fast is this happening? Right? I've said it's happening fast. Now let's see how fast. This is wind. You can see wind is growing, right? It's now at 600 gigawatts at the end of last year. It's doubling every 4.5 years, compounded annual growth of 17%. I guess just historical numbers. This is just reality here. Compounded annual growth for solar for the last 10 years, 42%, doubling every 2 years. However, going forward, it's taking about 3 years right now, a little under 3 years for the next cycle and a little over 3 years for the cycle after that. But again, I don't know the behavioral economics and how they're going to play into it, how that acceleration might even bring it closer to 2 again, okay, given that prices are going down. Now, why is this important? This is important because remember I mentioned the number of hours in the year, 8,760 hours, right? Solar hours, roughly 1,500, 2,000 if you're in like southern Spain and New Mexico desert, but more like 1,000 if you're in Germany or upstate New York, like here, 1,200. So 1,500 average of where it's being deployed right now. 1,500, that 2.4% of solar penetration of energy is actually a 12.5% impact. It's up here. That's the impact it's having on the grid. Why is this important? Because, and again, this is the speed, right? So a doubling from 2.5 to 5, you see now, 1, 2, 3 years, right? To go to 10, 1, 2, 3 years. It's taking 3 years to double right now. So, and I've applied a decreasing growth rate every year to this, right? And the minute we cross, here, so by 2026, you're at 100% of world energy deliveries coming from solar in the middle of the day. Peak capacity at that point is swamping the entire grid, right? 2026, that's tomorrow, right? It doesn't take long before this problem is monstrously big that we're not going to know what to do with this thing, okay? So why is that important? It's important because in the life cycle of any industry, an industry is born and it putters around. This is 1976, solar panels are going on satellites, right? $100,000 a square meter, right? Nobody could afford a solar panel. By the 1980s, if you could afford a solar panel, you were putting it out in the woods at your cabin with a battery and you had power versus before you didn't, right? And then eventually an industry starts to be born. And then an industry accelerates and then it gets commoditized. And then, once it's fully commoditized, if a new entrant comes into that industry and provides a better gimmick, a new mousetrap, then the existing industry falls down. Maybe it reinvents itself and spikes back up. This part of business is called flux. Okay, industry enters into flux. And when you get to flux, some companies die and some companies reinvent themselves for the next cycle, okay? We are in the middle of flux. 2021, 2022 is when flux is going to happen to us. But we're here in the life cycle of the solar industry. Why is that happening? Because we're just actually an overlay industry on an existing industry. We're in an existing industry. It's 100 years old, right? The power industry. But we're a new entrant. So we're actually providing this to another industry. And that's an important distinction because the problems you face when you're here are different than the problems you face when you're here. And the people that are here are not very well suited to face the challenges like the people that are here. Because here you're young and spiky and you're having to react, you're adaptable. And I think I put the quote in here. No, I didn't. Anyway, we'll get to another quote. As Charles Darwin taught us, it is not the strongest creature, it's not the biggest utility, it's not the fastest creature, it's the most adaptable that survives. okay? And as a young, spiky startup, you are far more adaptable than an incumbent. So if my money was on anyone, it would be on the entrepreneurs leaving this room today to disrupt that industry. So 2022 is this crossover point. For some reason, I circled that. That was important. I have some note up there about what's happening, which I think I've already covered by now. So we're going to go to the point where, okay, so it is happening, right? Climate change is driving people to go, in Europe at least, and in big parts of the world, to put pressure on their congressperson, their senators, on their constituency to become aware that they want something better. They want a cleaner world, right? And because there's popular pressure behind it, COP21, 197 nations signed on to the Paris Climate Accord. There's a reason for that, because they know that if they don't support it, they're not going to be voted into office. Now, there is an anomaly in all that, but I don't think it's worth mentioning. It's happening in this country. But the rest of the world is actually pulling back the curtain and wants a greener world and is working towards that. So the investors are aware of it. All the big pension funds are pulling out. They're not investing in carbon-intensive economy anymore. They're getting out of the oil and gas stocks and bonds that they were holding. Investors are starting to measure environmental, social, and governance aspects of companies before they're making investments. And of investments that are, call it, sin products, they're getting out. And oil and gas industry for them is now considered a sin product. So the death of that industry has been announced, and I don't want to be so dramatic as to call it death, but that industry is slowing, and there's another industry accelerating, and that's the renewable revolution. So what do you need to know? So this lecture was built into two parts. One was the engineering, one was the revolution, and the other one was entrepreneurship. So now I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship because we have an opportunity, but to bring it to life, there's something that we are challenged with being in this room, and you guys are going to like this part, I hope. So first thing is, if you're going to start a business, have a plan, okay? Now, there's a quote that comes with this, okay? It's a quote from Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth, okay? Be careful. There's a lot of disruption happening right now. Make sure that your plan is not just an idea. It's a robust plan. Have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C, okay? If you knew that you were going into an industry that's going to be turned on its head in 3 years, that's like stepping into the ring, me stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson. If I knew I was stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson in 3 years, okay, I know what I'd be doing right now. I would not be lecturing. I'd be working out at the gym. Okay, I'd be doing my survival mechanics here. I'd be growing my muscles as big as possible, right? In order to survive even the first round, right, would be a miracle, right? So I'm about to step into the ring with Mike Tyson. I better have a plan. What's my plan? It's a workout plan, right? In this case, you guys are doing the equivalent. You're stepping into the ring with big oil. You're stepping into the ring with big utilities, and you're disrupting them. You better have a plan, and it better be good. So you can go on the web and just say business plan, right? How to formulate a business plan. This happens to be an HBS one. Harvard Business School does plans, but these are all great questions, right? I wish I'd been asking myself these questions when I started my first business. But the thing is, when you have a plan is not an idea. A plan is milestones, deadlines, deliverables, and accountability, okay? You need to build a culture. If you're going to do entrepreneurship, you've got to build a culture of accountability. And the person you need to hold most accountable is yourself. The second person you need to hold accountable is anyone else that works with you. Okay, and I say with you, not for you, because what we're doing here is we're building a company around a purpose. The purpose is to decarbonize the planet, because if we don't, we won't have one. There's no planet B here. Okay, so in order to do that, what can you do, right? You got to build a team that's going to hold together. It's going to have a common vision. When you have a common vision, it's very easy to build accountability. Okay, so other things you can do. So first, have a plan. Second, once you're up and running, okay, this is kind of year 1, year 2, there's going to be a lot of noise. Shit's going to start going wrong. It always does, right? You didn't raise enough money, whatever. It doesn't matter what happens. But now map out. Just a simple map. This is something I used actually. And map out what you're working on. So assuming that you're producing a product of some kind, right? I wasn't producing a product, so mine was slightly different than this. The CEO, I think, should be involved in HR. I think it's a very important lesson. Be very careful who you hire. One bad hire will set you back, okay? Hire not for skills, hire for culture. Hire for people that share your moral compass, okay? Usually the big mistake startups do is they need a skill. Shit, I need the guy that knows how to do magnetic resonance inside batteries. Who the hell is that? Let me find that person, let me hire that guy. And because he's got the skill, you're willing to overlook all of his other issues that might actually be present. Now, he may be the greatest guy in the world, or she may be the greatest person in the world, but she may also be morally flawed, right? She might not get along with others, right? He might be stealing from the company, right? You gotta align culture. Culture beats talent every day of the week, okay? So lesson number 1, hire for culture. That's the biggest thing I can tell you after 10 years of hiring people. Hire for culture. Get the person that's morally aligned with you, that shares your purpose, that wants to save the planet. That guy will be an eco-warrior for you for life. They're also much stickier. People that share your purpose want to stick with you, and they'll fight things out when things get tough. So as a CEO, you should be involved in HR. Always. The head of HR should actually be one of your most important picks, okay? But if you look at this company, right, at this stage, you can see the CEO is involved in HR, product development, production, raising the equity, keeping the investors happy, right, or keeping them from pulling their hair out, managing the sales force, collecting the money because people aren't paying, right? Marketing, you got to figure out how to share your vision, right? You're involved with creating a vision and culture for the company, the strategy of the company, the board, the governance, everything else, right? This guy, this CEO, is active pretty much everywhere, right? And you can see, if you look here, you can see this person has learned to delegate, okay? Important distinction. This guy is doing his job, right? He's involved in equity raising. He's involved in finance and accounting. He's involved in collections. And he reports to the board. He's doing his job. This guy's actually a good hire, right? If you look at your chief legal officer, he's involved where he needs to be involved, okay? So what's the first observation? When you start mapping your activities early on, you're gonna notice that you have clusters, okay? I can tell you what disease this company has. This company's got a production issue. Parts are not leaving the factory either because of quality or in quantity that I need. Because of that, I may be having equity problems. These might be related, but I'm definitely having a fundraising problem in this company. People are not paying my bills. I got too many people focusing on accounts receivable, and I got way too many people at the board, so it's telling me it's an early stage company where I haven't learned how to tell people not to be at my board. I want to include everyone because we're all singing Kumbaya still. We're early startup days. Everyone's important, so everyone comes to the board. You don't have structure yet. This company is young. What else is it telling me? These 4 people, okay, are completely overwhelmed. What this is telling me, this company has an HR problem. It hasn't hired fast enough. You've not been able to specialize yet. Important to specialize. But if you don't map your activities, you can't create your beachheads. Because with this, I can figure out exactly, okay, I have a production issue. I can put a task force around the production issue. Let's get this solved. Let's give ourselves 90 days. Let's hammer this one. Let's kill this one so this one goes away, right? Next, equity raising. Well, if this is solved, maybe equity will solve itself, so let's not worry about that. Accounts receivable. Well, let's hire the mob to collect for us. Let's sell the paper at 50 cents on the dollar. I don't care. All right? Let's get people to pay us or they're out. And then, I'm not saying that in a serious way, by the way. And then on governance, you know, I gotta professionalize my board because it's going to be providing too much noise if everyone's at the board. Because people leak. Okay? When you have ideas, you want other people to hear them. Well, it might not be the appropriate forum, right? You got to separate the governance from the execution. Execution has problems. It always does. But those problems are not necessarily board level problems. You want the board to focus on the future. You don't want it to focus on your day-to-day operation. That's the wrong place for the board to be helping you. The board is there to help you see the forest, not the trees. Your job is the trees. That's the CEO's job. Don't let the CEO push you into the board. Okay? That's not where you want to be. Now, another thing to remember. Start creating processes early. Okay? You have a strategy, implement your strategy, create a track record, measure how well you did. Based on your track record, you can now refine your strategy, you can implement better, you get a better track record. Okay? This is how you create success. Okay? In the early days, build a platform. Okay? Now, depending on where you are, right? Growth is probably the most important thing when you're young, right? You have to grow, because if you don't have sales, you can't pay the bills, right? Over time, as you grow, you have the volume, I will get growth at any cost. I don't care what it costs me to grow, because without growth, I don't have a company, right? But at some point, that growth is not efficient. So optimization gets more and more important as you have more growth. You need to optimize. You need to start measuring and improving everything, right? And then you've got to figure out where you are in the life cycle. There are lots of good books out there. There's one called Growing Pains. If you read that book and you're in a company, you'll quickly think, oh wow, I'm a big company or whatever. And you read the book, it's actually quite humbling. It's like you're at the adolescent stage. You haven't made it yet. And it'll tell you exactly what growing pains you're going to be facing. And you'll see them. You'll see in this thing, you'll see all your growing pains in that book. It'll spit it out at you. It was published like 20 years ago. It's a great book on growing pains. It's called Growing Pains. I'll add it to the presentation at the end. I'll put a little bibliography of a couple of books that I think are worth reading. Because once you figure out where you are in here, now you can look at the activities that are appropriate for here. Okay, so when you're in the beginning, getting a first deal is super important. Everyone's focused on that. Delivering accurate numbers also, right? Like shit, let's reconcile bank accounts. That stuff's important in the early days, right? You're taking on investor money, you got to be accountable for it. Next, you're starting to build a platform. You want to recruit, hiring the wrong people, right? You want to try not to. Usually what happens is by the time you figure out that you've got to build a culture is when you figure out that you got most of your recruiting wrong. And then you got to figure out how to keep the good people because the bad people are starting to poison the water, right? So yes, 5 minutes. Wow, I'll go faster. Okay, so you got to figure out where you are in your life cycle so you can figure out which tasks. Once you figure out which tasks, map the tasks to build a culture. I put some ideas down in terms of how you manage risk, how you scale, how you now start to narrow down where you want to grow. You go for your most profitable markets or the most important, the strategic markets for you, and then building the culture. And then, of course, next to each one, if there was one thing that could improve what we're doing over here, what would it be? List it. Start making task lists for yourself. Get the company improving itself every day, every day, every day. The more you improve, the better you are. So in the life cycle of a company, I think this is, given that I only have 5 minutes, growth in the beginning is not even important, but then growth is important, right? And then it's less important. Optimization is important, but then something happens. At some point, your growth is so big that the marginal point of interest of the next deal is just not worth it. That means you're in the life cycle of the thing, you've entered into the commoditization stage. At this point, you want to reinvent yourself. You want to evolve. Now, there's 2 ways you can evolve a business. Anzoff had a great matrix for this. You can go from an existing market to a similar market. You can go from the US to Canada, assuming that those markets are similar for most of us. Or you can go into new markets. You can go to Angola or Sierra Leone. I don't know. Usually, poor business people go this way, right? They keep taking more and more risk, right? For decreasing returns. Smart business people create solutions or products. Similar solutions at first and new solutions ultimately. So you move to the right. Don't allow yourself to be pushed south, okay? If you're finding that your best opportunities are in a neighboring market, in a similar market, or even a foreign market, you're not going to be able to compete. You're going to get eaten alive. Your business is going to die. So don't do that. One thing to remember here, reinvent yourself. It's much easier than to go abroad. And again, what does abroad mean for you? I'm Norwegian. As somebody mentioned, I speak 5 languages or 6, depending on which ones I count. So for me, home is a bunch of places. But I would say OECD, that's familiar to me. Certain rules apply. Non-OECD, it's not quite the same rules. When you're there, the countries are fun, they're good to be in, but you know what? There are lots of people that measure this stuff. You got Deloitte's as an ease of doing business, right? The 38 steps versus the 6 steps to get the same thing approved in one country versus another. So if you look at the ease of doing business index that Deloitte does, and you look at the World Corruption Index, which is another one you should track, correlate those and look at the market that you're trying to go into from the market you're coming from, and you'll see what challenges you're going to face. And by doing that, you can figure out where you want to go versus where you don't want to go. Okay, so if you are going to go abroad, measure everything. It's much easier. So before you step into the ring, if I only have 5 minutes, know yourself. Analyze your strengths. Do I have more than 5 minutes? Can I take 7? Really? Okay. Analyze your strengths. So you're an engineer, right? I'm an engineer. I'm great at numbers. I can spot trends and I can solve almost any problem. So what are my weaknesses? Well, I'm great at numbers, right? Shit, that's a weakness because people sometimes get in the way, right? I can see it really clearly. Other people don't get it, right? You got to slow down. You got to make sure that you keep people on board. You can't lose people along the journey. The purpose is only there if they can see it, okay? I can spot trends, right? Others don't understand what I see, right? This is your biggest weakness. You're going to spot trends before everybody else. Make sure you keep your constituency on board. I can solve almost any problem. As an engineer, that's a really, really shitty problem, is because when people don't get it, I do things myself, okay? You cannot scale a company if you're doing things yourself. Teach, don't do, okay? And be humble when you're teaching or you're going to lose people. So, biggest thing as an engineer, you got to have self-awareness, okay? Once you have self-awareness, when does your body do things that you don't, when do you get defensive? When you realize you're getting defensive, that's already a great step. I've realized I just got defensive, right? It's self-awareness. Once you have self-awareness, you can have self-control. I can learn that when I get defensive, I get punchy, so let me try and figure out why I'm getting defensive so I can stop it, right? Once you learn how to control yourself, you can now start to become aware of the group around you. Once you become aware of the group, you can start to control the group. Much like you can control yourself, you can control other people's emotions. This is a learned skill. That's the good news here, okay? EQ is a taught skill. IQ you're born with. EQ can be taught, okay? You can learn EQ. Even the most psychopathic of psychopaths can learn how to mimic other human beings, right? EQ is a learned skill. So, biggest thing here is, unhealthy communication, slow down. Did I miss something? Is something missing? Okay? Or did I misunderstand something? If you take those steps, as soon as you feel that self-awareness going, ooh, this person's attacking me, there's no reason our mind sees, okay, emotions, trust, the way we interpret trust between human beings is very simple. We see things through three lenses. The logical lens, the ethical lens, okay, so does this person have credibility enough to tell me that I'm wrong? And then ultimately the emotional lens, okay? Those three, unfortunately, are superimposed, so we don't know what's kicking back sometimes. The biggest thing is everybody has an ability to trust, okay? Everybody has, usually, if the counterparty is credible, a willingness to trust, okay? It's, if the argument is logical, you should be able to land the point. So how do you keep people from losing their temper? You slow down. Ask yourself, if you're getting in that moment where you ask yourself, or you're seeing the other person get heated, ask them, did I misunderstand, or am I missing something? Why is this upsetting you? Slow the conversation down. You'll find that most conversations end right back up here in the logical realm. There's no reason to get emotional, because what happens is when you lose that, you enter into this phase where people don't really know what to do very well. Okay, they start questioning your credibility, or they get emotional about you. I don't like that guy. How the hell do you combat that, right? So, because the reason I'm talking about this is because at the basis, conflict is good. If you don't fight over stuff, you won't resolve stuff. If you don't resolve stuff, if we're not in full agreement, because we fought it out, and we said, you know what? I know I feel I'm right. I know you're right. Or you feel you're right, we're gonna go that way, we're gonna go your way, or we're gonna go my way. Unless you get to that common understanding, you don't get accountability. You can't hold your team accountable if they're not on board. The only way to get them on board is to have that conflict. That's part of the journey. So, here's the big learning point. You observe something in your startup, and you react to it, and because of that, you have an outcome, okay? When you get to higher learning, self-awareness, self-control, you observe something, you decide the outcome you want, and then you tailor your response, okay? If you react, you've lost. If you respond, you've won. You responded because you knew the outcome you wanted. Remember, the coolest head always wins. When you observe something, slow down. Figure out the outcome you want, then respond. Don't react. This is what everybody does, okay? Now, so that was the coolest head always wins, and if everyone's moving together, success takes care of itself. So you want the team to move together. You want them to have a common mission, a common goal, and you will get there. Henry Ford said this, by the way, and he knew how to build teams. So, lessons learned. I'm out of time, but there were lots. Have purpose. It helps. Work out. strong body is a strong mind. Don't underestimate the challenge, okay? Plan A, plan B, plan C. On HR, hire people you'd like to work for. Single most important thing, don't hire people because you like them. Think about, would I like to work for this person? If you wouldn't like working for this person, don't hire them because lots of people are going to report to these people. Don't ever hire someone you wouldn't want to work for. Biggest learning lesson I've had. Hire for culture, grow capabilities. Anyway, I'm out of time, but lots of